Hi everyone, my name is Angela and welcome back to my channel and to the end of March, and happy Easter. There's a lot that's going on at the moment. I'm just getting over a cold, so forgive me if I sound a little bit funny, a little bit flat. It wasn't the best way to end the month, but that's the breaks. This month was actually a really good month in terms of reading, and today I'm going to share with you the books that I read in March and a few highlights personally in my month as well. I read a blog recently that January and February felt like 417 days, whereas March just felt like 10 days, flew past like that. And I have to agree, it just went so quickly. I did have a good month for reading. I read 6 books during the month, which was a little bit higher than usual for me. And when I explain how my month was, I think you'll understand why. At the start of March, I had my gallbladder removed, and it had been bothering me for about 6 months. It had been going on for quite a while. It had been misdiagnosed as something else. And anyway, I was so glad we were able to get that surgery in at the start of March. My recovery so far has been really great, and it was just one night stay in hospital, very minor, but the recovery has been really good, and the only side effect is I no longer have any pain that was caused by my gallbladder, so I'm so thankful for that. And when I look back on my month in books, I can see that I read a lot more at the start of the month because I was convalescing, so to speak, spending more time just relaxing. I wasn't able to do housework or anything like that. So I was swapping out TV for books. Well, I had a lot of free time on my hands, but I can see why my books were increased at the start of the month for sure. And then a couple of weeks ago, my husband and I went away for a midweek wedding in Busselton, which is about 2.5 hours, maybe 200 kilometers south of where I am. It's a beautiful little coastal beachside town that really comes to life in summer, and we used to holiday there a lot when we had young children. There's been so much that's happened to the town since we were last there, so it was really nice to see it. And it's one of those places where you can just park your car at the hotel and you can just walk everywhere. And we were fortunate to stay in a new hotel that had just opened a week or two prior. And that's where the wedding party was staying, and all the family that were coming pretty much stayed at that location. The wedding was lovely. It was on the beach. We had beautiful weather, and then afterwards just had canapes overlooking the water, and it was really nice. And so we were just down there for a couple of nights, and then we also did a little bit of walking through the town, and I managed to find the bookshop, and the bookshop was really great. I don't remember going there previously. I think I thought it was more of a gift store than a bookstore, and I was pleasantly surprised to go and check it out. And I did buy a few books, which I wanted to share with you because there's quite a few interesting stories behind them. So firstly, I bought My Brilliant Sister, which was a book that had been, I don't know how I came across it, but it popped up in my path somehow. This, however, has taken me down quite the rabbit hole in terms of this book and its predecessors, like how it came to be. So I'll try and briefly explain it for you. So before My Brilliant Sister, there was a book called My Brilliant Career, written by Stella Miles Franklin, and that was written in 1901. It's a coming-of-age story from the perspective of a 16-year-old girl, and a lot of people believe that it is an autobiographical story of Stella Miles Franklin herself, although I believe she's refuted that. She said that it's not autobiographical, it is fictitious, although you can definitely see how there are some parallels from her own life in the character. So Miles Franklin went on to live a very independent life. She traveled, she had a lot of freedom, a bit of a bohemian lifestyle, I understand. And through her will, she actually bequeathed her estate to an award. She founded an award called the Miles Franklin Literary Award. And I think the first recipient was in 1957. And the prize is awarded to a novel, I just want to make sure I get this right, a novel which is of the highest literary merit and presents Australian life in any of its phases. And as I went down this rabbit hole, I was pleased to find that I had a few novels on my to be read shelf, my actual physical shelf, that are recipients of the Miles Franklin Award. I just didn't really understand this huge backstory, and I haven't read My Brilliant Career, which was this first book that Miles Franklin wrote. Then comes My Brilliant Sister by Amy Brown, and this was just published this year in 2024, and this is a quick synopsis on the back. After her autobiographical novel My Brilliant Career made her famous, Stella Miles Franklin lived a trailblazing bohemian life. Not so her beloved sister Linda, who accepted the path of marriage, motherhood, domesticity, and died at 25. In her own extraordinary, genre-bending novel, Amy Brown rescues Linda from obscurity, placing her story alongside two modern counterparts: a mother who has put her writing on hold while she works and raises her daughter, and a singer-songwriter who has sacrificed everything for stardom and is now unraveling, isolated by the sea. In the middle of these two lives is the riposte Linda might have written to her sister, an irresistible, note-perfect alternative version of My Brilliant Career. It sounds absolutely fascinating, and I didn't understand the full backstory at the time when I added this to my virtual TBR. But when I picked it up and started reading the back of it properly, I realised all these connections. And as you know, it's a goal of mine to read more Australian literary fiction. Miles Franklin, like I said, I have not read, but I definitely will read that. So that was definitely one that I picked up. And like I said, that's taken me down this whole other path, because not just Miles Franklin, but all those other novels that have been written, that have been awarded the Miles Franklin Literary Award. I think those are probably something that I'll probably be looking for actively in the future as well. But now my dilemma is, do I read this first, or shall I try and find My Brilliant Career and read that one first? So if you have any insight, please let me know below in the comments. The next book I got was The Bookseller at the End of the World by Ruth Shaw. And this is a non-fiction book. I don't often buy these books that are titled about bookshops or booksellers. I feel they're a bit clickbaity for me. And usually the story is I haven't had good experience with them. But this particular one sounded interesting. She is a New Zealand author, and it is a non-fiction book. It is a memoir of hers about her two bookstores. So I'll just read the synopsis briefly. Ruth Shaw runs two tiny bookshops in the remote village of Manapuri in Fiordland, in the deep south of New Zealand. This rich memoir weaves together stories of the characters who visit her bookshops, musings from favourite books, and bittersweet stories from Ruth's full and varied life. There's something here about sailing through the Pacific, being held up by pirates, working in Sydney's King's Cross with drug addicts and prostitutes, being on a yacht with her husband. This is quite an adventure, and it sounded like a really, really fascinating story that I thought I really wanted to find out more about. It was published in 2022, so it's fairly new, but that's something that caught my eye in the bookstore. And the next one I saw was The Light Years by Elizabeth Jane Howard. This was on my TBR for a while. I'm not sure how I came across it, but I went through a bit of a phase of adding a lot of English literary fiction, especially in those interwar years. This one is actually volume 1 of 5, called the Cazalet Chronicles, and it's about a family in particular. Told with exceptional grace, The Light Years is a modern classic of 20th century English life, and is the first novel of Elizabeth Jane Howard's extraordinary best-selling saga, The Cazalet Chronicles. Every summer, the Cazalet brothers, Hugh, Edward and Rupert, return to their family home in the heart of the Sussex countryside with their wives and children. There they are joined by their formidable parents and unmarried sister Rachel to enjoy 2 glorious months of picnics, games and sun-drenched excursions to the coast. But not even this idyllic setting can soothe the siblings' fears and heartache. Yeah, it sounds like a real journey. I think it's going to be a family that you get invested in by there's 5 volumes of it. So it's not a small book, it's 500 pages. I did not realize that when I added it to my virtual TBR. But I saw this in the store and I recognized the cover, and I haven't seen this in any stores here in Australia so far. So I'm so glad I got that one. And again, this has been on my TBR for a long time and I had not seen it in a store, and it is Notes from Walnut Tree Farm by Roger Deakin. This is another non-fiction, but it's not a memoir, so to speak. It's a collection of writing over a few years by Roger Deakin on his farm, which is Walnut Tree Farm. And this is the synopsis. For the last 6 years of his life, Roger Deakin kept notebooks in which he wrote his daily thoughts, impressions, feelings and observations about and around his home, Walnut Tree Farm. Collected here are the very best of these writings, capturing his extraordinary, restless curiosity about nature, as well as his impressions of our changing world. It jumped on my radar a long time ago, and so I've opened it a few times and just picked out little passages here and there, and it is delightful. I believe this was published 2 years after Deakin died, And it's been around for a couple of decades now, I think, but I'm really, really enjoying it. And I got this gorgeous little new bookmark as well. It's the White Rabbit. I just thought it was so cute. I mean, any chance to buy a new bookmark and I'll take it. But so those were the books, those were what I bought while I was away on a little bit of a mini holiday. Now I'm going to get into what I actually read in March. As I mentioned, I was convalescing for the start of the month, which really helped the quota. But I really enjoyed that moment of being able to finish a couple of books I had on the go and to also pick up a couple of books that I perhaps wouldn't have picked up otherwise. The first one I finished was Why Women Grow, Stories of Soil, Sisterhood and Survival by Alice Vincent. I had this one on the go since January. I admit I picked this book up for the cover and its title, and the inner sleeves are just beautiful. It is non-fiction. It was published in 2023, and it's a really great insight into how gardening and nature can be empowering and restorative. And this has a number of it's really quite diverse, the pool of women that have been interviewed for this particular book. So you're getting a real range of stories. My understanding is that Alice Vincent put a call out on Instagram or something like that for people, or women in particular, to share their stories about why they garden. And that led her to then traipse around Britain, meeting them to actually talk to them in person. And you can kind of understand that a lot of stories might have come from grief or loss. But there was also finding a sense of place for a lot of women. It was really putting down roots in a place, that this is my land, my home. It also talks there's a little bit of a political aspect to it, where the fact that you are able to garden is a privilege in itself, and not everyone has that ability. So it was really eye-opening. It took me a long time to finish it because I felt like each chapter was almost an entire book in itself, and I had to just take some time to digest and ruminate on what I picked out of it. And there was a couple of quotes that really stuck with me, and one of them was that I tend not to feel lonely when I garden alone, which I found I really enjoyed that phrase. And also how the garden can be a mirror, and what you're experiencing in life can often be represented in your garden, whether it is decaying or unkempt or wild, or if it is manicured and maintained. You know, that can be a direct reflection of your life. And the other one was also that the reason I think we garden is because it is a constant education, and I have to agree with that every year, every season is different. You might grow one plant one year and next year it doesn't do so well. It is a constant education. It's evolving. Nature is never the same. So I really enjoyed being in that world for a moment. So I do recommend it if you're looking for something insightful. It's not hard and heavy. There's definitely some topics in there it can be a little bit confronting, but overall, the fact that we as women have the ability to still try and break ground and plant seeds, even though we have so many other responsibilities on our shoulders, we prioritize it still. I think it's a really great message, and there can be a lot of peace and transformation found when you do garden. So I highly recommend it. I gave it 4.5 stars. This book was one I picked up in the middle of the night. I had just come home from surgery and my sleep was all over the place because I'd been on some pain medication. And anyway, one night it was like, I think 2 a.m. and I couldn't sleep. So I got out of bed and sat down and thought I'd read a book, and I picked up this book. And I read it through until I think probably about 4 or 5 in the morning. And then the next day I picked it up again, and I finished it all in one day in total. And that is The Berry Pickers by Amanda Peters. This was published in 2023, and it was a debut novel for Amanda Peters. The story opens up in July 1962 when a young Micmac family, I apologise if that's incorrectly pronounced, First Nation Micmac family have arrived in Maine from Nova Scotia for the annual blueberry picking. That's how they earn their money, as they go from place to place seasonally to pick apples, pick blueberries. A 4-year-old Ruthie goes missing, and they can't find her anywhere. And her brother Joe is haunted by her disappearance, and it really does affect him for decades going on. But then we're introduced to another narrative, which is of a young girl named Norma, who is in an affluent suburb in Maine, and she's starting to have these dreams which she feels are more like memories. And recollections as opposed to something imaginary. And when she confronts her parents about it, her parents are very cagey, her mother in particular is very overprotective. It really is a beautiful character-driven story. As we switch from Joe to Norma's perspective over this 50-year period, you see how Joe and his family are dealing with Ruthie's disappearance, but also Norma trying to find out who she really is. She has an innate feeling that her parents are not being truthful. I found it really immersive, very quiet and eye-opening to the Mi'kmaq people, which I really did not know much about. They are the First Nation people in, I think, the Eastern Canada area, so Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island. So it was really interesting to read that perspective. I gave this one 4.25 stars. Then I read Winnie the Pooh, and oh my goodness, this was a highlight for me for the month. I truly, truly enjoyed it. It was perfect timing to have a bit of a comfort read, and I adored reading this book. I just loved being in the 100 Acre Wood with Pooh and his friends and just being transported there. It was so nostalgic. The illustrations were beautiful. And I love the underlying message of friendship and being there for each other and just a little bit of adventure. This was one of my favorite. Pooh is just an adorable character. A.A. Milne's writing is truly beautiful, and I love Pooh, that he is unapologetically himself. And this was a little passage as Pooh has gone visiting and he's in Rabbit's house. As he's in Rabbit's house, he's asking for morning tea or early lunch or something like that. Pooh always liked a little something at 11 o'clock in the morning, but he was very glad to see Rabbit getting out plates and mugs. And when Rabbit said, "Honey or condensed milk with your bread?" he was so excited, he said, "Both." And then, so as not to seem greedy, he added, "But don't bother about the bread, please." And I was just like, those little Poohisms, I love it. I really do love it. So I give it 5 honey drizzled stars, and I have bought the next 2 books, which I will be reading over the next couple of months. I'll need to pace myself. If you have not gotten it, if you have not read it, I highly, highly, highly recommend it. A.A. Milne's writing is absolutely beautiful. The next book I read in March was Heartbake by Charlotte Rhee. This is a memoir, and cloth-bound books just catch everything, don't they? I mentioned this in my autumn books to curl up with, and I really, really enjoyed it. This is Charlotte Rhee is an Australian author. I actually went to her, she went to an author night at a local independent bookstore, and I went there with a friend of mine, and I hadn't read the book. I had heard of it, I'd seen it everywhere, but I thought, oh, that sounds like fun. So we went to that, and I bought the book there, and I got it autographed by Charlotte, which was lovely. And I just hadn't gotten around to reading it. Published in 2023, it's an uplifting memoir about food and finding yourself, self-discovery. And at the end of the book, there's a number of recipes that are mentioned throughout the memoir itself, which is really, really nice. So the book starts at the beginning of Charlotte recounting her relationship with her family, with her mother, and then it leads into her adulthood. And we're eventually at a stage where she is on the cusp of leaving her husband, which happens to be a day or two before Sydney's first pandemic lockdown. But throughout all of the memoir is Charlotte's relationship with food. There is the relationship she has where she just can't stomach food. She's going through a grieving process with her marriage, but then there's where food has become that restorative need, that gateway that she needed to heal herself. The writing was spectacular. There was a lot of humor and self-awareness. The self-awareness was really quite poignant. The fact that I really admire memoirs and autobiographies where people can really analyze their life and see why this happened or how this happened, and the self-awareness in here is beautiful, along with the vulnerability that Charlotte shows. I really do recommend it. So I gave this 5 stars. I highly recommend it, especially if you're someone who has, you have a connection with food in some way. 5 stars. It was beautiful. And the next book I read was Mildred Pierce by James M. Cain, and this was absolutely marvelous. This has been on my TBR for a long time. Like there's a sticker on the back from a bookstore I know has been out of business for 10 years, so it's been a while. This was one of those occasions where I loved the miniseries so much with Kate Winslet. I told myself, Ange, You don't need the book because the miniseries is just perfect. You do not need it. And I'm here to tell you now that that is always incorrect. You need to read the book, even if you've seen the movie or the TV series. This was incredible. And it is actually one of the most faithful adaptations I've come across of a book going to screen. Watching the series, you feel like you're reading the book if you have read it. So, wow. James M. Cain is probably the John Grisham of the 40s and 50s. He wrote a lot of books that were turned into movies. He wasn't so much a successful screenwriter, but his novels got adapted for the screen. The other ones that he's written are movies like The Postman Always Rings Twice and Double Indemnity. But Mildred Pierce is a little bit different in the sense that it's a real sympathetic look at a mother, at a woman, whereas his other movies or his other characters, I think women are a little bit more, they're just the bimbo, the side piece to the main character, which is the guy. And all of these, which they're film noir, so there is always a mystery or a crime or a murder element to it. Mildred Pierce is a wife and a mother in Depression-era Glendale, California. She has just you open up the pages and she is just kicking her husband out of the house. She is tired of his relationship that he has with another woman. He is unemployed. He's not doing what she needs him to do. So she says, enough's enough, get out. And then she comes to realize that now she has to support her 2 daughters and she has no credentials to speak of. She's got no work experience, bar being a good cook and a baker and infamously having a good pair of legs. So we follow Mildred as she starts to look for work, and it's Depression era. Everyone is looking for work. It's impossible to find anything. And she ultimately ends up working as a waitress in a cafe, and she gets some success from selling her pies commercially. And then she starts to get an idea that maybe she can see a niche in the restaurant industry, and she thinks that maybe she could create her own restaurant and build, and she can see a future in that. Something that is honorable and something that her children will be able to respect. Mildred is really intelligent. She has a lot of moxie. I think the description of her is often hard-boiled, but she has a lot of good things going for her. But she is very flawed in her choices of men and the way she interacts with her vile, narcissistic daughter, Vida. Vida is a character everyone will love to hate. She is absolutely fascinating. She is the one that you hope is going to be the one that is going to die in this book. But so I think ultimately this book is a story of a mother-daughter relationship that is very dysfunctional. And Vida is a character that I thought I knew, but she jumped off the pages for me in this. And she just astounded me with her cruelty and her entitlement to Mildred. This passage really summed up Mildred and Vida's relationship for me. Mildred has just come home and she can hear Vida practicing her piano. To have Vida play the piece about rainbows just for her was delicious. To have her scream at her was painful, but bearable, for at least it was she that was being screamed at. To have her lying there on the bed staring at the ceiling and not even thinking about her was an agony too great to be borne. I think ultimately it's a story about an unhealthy mother-daughter relationship, but the fact it was written in the 1940s by a man is quite interesting. I find it really insightful, and I do think that probably every mother and every daughter should read it, because you see things in here that you're like, I've seen that. I've seen other people do that, and you start to realize how dysfunction can creep in. But I highly recommend it. I enjoyed the writing, which was direct and simple. There was not a lot of fluff that you had to read around. I will definitely be picking up a couple of other James M. Cain books, and I gave this 4.5 stars. So I decided to stay in the 1940s and 50s for a little bit longer, especially in America, by reading Brooklyn by Colm Tóibín, and it was really enjoyable. So it's the story of Eilish, who is a young girl in Ireland. There's not a lot of career prospects, a lot of job prospects available for her, and so her older sister Rose arranges for her to essentially be sponsored to immigrate to America, where she'll have more opportunities. Eilish moves to Brooklyn. She slowly adjusts. She ends up going to night school to become a bookkeeper, which is, she's got a head for numbers. It's a natural fit for her. And she falls in love. And then she's called back to Ireland following a family tragedy, and that's when she starts to be pulled in two very different directions. There's she wants to follow her heart, but then she also has a duty to family. And I felt like the story was really well written, very similar to James M. Cain in the sense that it was very simple and direct. But I did enjoy it. I'm glad I read it because I do want to read Long Island, which is the follow-up to this. It's a sequel, which I think is a couple of decades down the track. It's such a quiet story, and it's not an extraordinary one. You know, it's not like Mildred Pierce where she's creating this empire and these things are happening. I think what makes this special is that it is very simple, and it could be about you or me. It's not a lot of bells and whistles. Eilish's story is not special. She's just a girl trying to do the right thing for her family and for herself. And that's what makes it special to me. Especially when it's a life that many people have lived, where they've left their small town and they've gone on to find their freedom and find a place that they really feel they fit in. And then they're brought back to that small town, those relationships, those people that are still there doing the same thing. And you struggle. I can empathize with that a lot. But the writing was very easy and descriptive. And for that reason, I'm looking forward to Long Island. And I gave this book 4.5 stars. So that was my March in books. It was pretty good, right? It was fairly varied. I'm surprised how many new books I read. I got in a few non-fictions and everything. It was nice and well-rounded, so I'm really glad for that. But tell me, what was your 5-star book? My 5-star was The Heartbake by Charlotte Rea. I really want to know what your 5-star for March was. And I hope you have a wonderful Easter weekend, and I will see you again next week. Bye.